It's time to rev your engines. The Syracuse Nationals proudly presents the Cavalcade of Cars, March 22nd through 23rd at the New York State Fairgrounds. The two-day indoor car show features all the classics, plus lifted trucks, Jeeps, motorcycles, and more. Cavalcade of Cars, CNY.com.
Welcome in on the pregame show. Tim Leonard sitting in for Brian. I'll be with you the rest of the night as we get you geared up for the ACC Tournament first round game. Orange and the Seminoles and the Tuesday night 11 versus the 14 game. Not exactly the game that we all thought Syracuse would be playing in the ACC Tournament this year, but this is where we are, and this is going to be an interesting game tonight based on how the season has gone. Syracuse has been playing really their best basketball of the season lately. We all know the story of the recent games, get up by double figures, and can they hold on? And it has been a no to a lot of those games, but did play well in their last game, the Senior Day game, coming off a victory over Virginia. And now they draw the Noles, which is honestly a pretty tough matchup. Florida State, a pretty talented roster for being the 11 seed in the conference. The Seminoles playing in the final year of the Leonard Hamilton era. So a lot to play for. They also got a big win on Senior Day and a big win for Hamilton in his final home game at the Tucker Center. They took down SMU, which, by the way, winner of this game will play SMU. So SMU's really last two opponents, Syracuse, Florida State, they'll see one of them again tomorrow. That'll be an even later tip if the Orange get a win here tonight. And, of course, Syracuse needs to do the thing that NC State did last year. If they want to keep playing basketball, they've got to win the darn thing starting from Tuesday all the way through Saturday. So the Orange in the nightcap tonight. We'll get the pregame show going here. We'll be back with you for postgame, of course, as soon as the final buzzer sounds. Maybe it'll be the final buzzer on the season. We'll see. I'm sure there will be plenty of calls postgame if that is the case. We can rehash the season some more if it comes down to that. And we welcome your calls here on the pregame show and on the postgame show later on tonight. We'll have some sound from Adrian Autry. As always, we'll effort that on the postgame show as the ACC Tournament in Charlotte is underway, and the Orange are in the nightcap game tonight. Looking at the screen right now, the second game of 3 today is moving along pretty nicely here. 9:09 to play in the Cal-Virginia Tech game. 15 seed Cal, longtime ACC foe Cal, is ahead of Virginia Tech by 3. That is a matchup of two 13 and 18 teams. So not a lot of people in attendance, it seems like, for these Charlotte games, sort of as expected. But the Orange will be taking on Florida State for the second time this year. The Seminoles did knock off the Cuse in Tallahassee at the Tucker Center all the way back on January 4th. It was a 16-point victory for Florida State. 90-74 was the final score of that one. So we'll look back through the box score of that game. What can that tell us about tonight's matchup? We'll run you down some of the keys for an Orange victory to continue and get a crack at SMU in the second round tomorrow night, which really is a very winnable game, given that SMU is sort of not playing great right now, and Syracuse just went into their place and outplayed them for basically the entirety of the game until they let it slip away, seemingly like all the other games in the back half of the ACC schedule this year. Syracuse has been ahead in pretty much every game of recent memory, and I would be almost surprised if that trend didn't continue tonight. Florida State is slight favorites right now. When you look at ESPN Bet and the sports books and things like that, I believe it opened at a 2.5-point favorite for Florida State. KenPom has the Orange losing by 3. So Florida State favored. You look at their metrics, mentioned their record, 17-13. 8-12 in conference play. They have one quad one win all year, and it is a back end of the quad one. A road victory at Wake Forest is the Seminoles' best win to date in the final season of the Leonard Hamilton era. It has been very up and down for them, a lot like it has been up and down for Syracuse, with mostly downs, of course. in the grand scheme of what the expectations are for these programs to be sitting here. Florida State 17-13, the Orange, of course, with a not as good of record as that. They're sitting at 13-17, 13-18, whatever it is. It's 13 wins for Syracuse right now. So Syracuse is trying to avoid 13-19. They're trying to avoid a 13-18. I was thinking it would have been 19 because then they would have been trying to avoid the 20-loss season. They don't have to worry about that. They'll lose one more game. It'll be a 19-loss season when the season ends. Whenever it does end, whether that is tonight, whether it's tomorrow night, heck, maybe they go on a little bit of a run here. We'll see how it all shakes out. We've talked about it all year. The ACC very wide open after the top three teams. We know Duke's the best team. We know Louisville is probably the second best, if not Clemson. Louisville and Clemson are in that tier, probably number 2. And that is that for NCAA tournament teams at this point. Of course, North Carolina can maybe work their way in. SMU has been on the bubble, and now as a 6 seed after their loss to Florida State, they probably need to win the ACC tournament as well just to play more games for SMU. So that would be the opponent if Syracuse gets the win here this evening over Florida State. Phone lines are open at 315-437-7644. For ESPN 44 is the phone number to call. Hop on in the chat as well. We'll take your comments and chat questions throughout on the pregame and the postgame show tonight. Opening tip coming up just past the top of the hour is what we're counting on, barring a overtime situation, which is always possible. Looks like it is a pretty close game in front of us in the 10-15 game, the 10 seed Virginia Tech, the 15 seed being Cal. So good weather in Syracuse today. It's been a long winter. Been a long winter with the basketball season coupled with the snow. At least we got some good vibes weather-wise. Nice day to be out and about. Hope everyone is enjoying the nice weather in the area, and we'll see if maybe the vibes will be good after tonight's game, after a game tonight where Syracuse is in win-or-go-home mode as we enter into postseason basketball. We saw the Orange play pretty nicely last time out in a similar type of mindset where you knew, okay, the clock is winding down on these transfer portal guys that they have, the Eddie Lampkins, the Lucas Taylors. Lucas Taylor's really improved quite a bit over the course of this season. Jaquan Carlos was represented on senior day. Naheem McLeod will be going against his former team, Florida State, tonight. And as far as the matchup tonight and kind of perusing through the box score of the last time these two teams played and what it means for what could be some keys tonight for the Orange, we mentioned January 4th was the first meeting between the two teams. So very early on in ACC play for Syracuse. They lost at Florida State. Syracuse, actually, it was the only time this year where they had their two star players playing in an ACC game together. J.J. Starling had returned after it was sort of up in the air. Would he be available for that game? He came out of warm-ups and did a little warm-up late and then was ready to go. Came out kind of firing. Starling ended with 12 points and did really fizzle in the second half. But he provided a spark. Donnie Freeman, of course, the other star player. That was the last game that Freeman played. So they overlapped for just one game all year in ACC play. And that was the third overall ACC game for the Orange. They were coming off a home loss to Wake Forest in that tough one. And the final game that JJ was not a part of the lineup. So 90-74 was the final score that day. Rebounding Florida State really out-rebounded Syracuse in the second half. FSU, as always, under Leonard Hamilton. And they've already announced their next head coach, and they're already moving on from Hamilton. That was basically the worst-kept secret, that Leonard Hamilton was in his final year, and it seemed like it was trending that way really the last couple years down in Tallahassee. But they always are one of the tallest teams in the country. They're fourth right now in height in the nation, according to Ken Pom. They have long, athletic, rangy guys. They are a factory for that. We know they play a lot of guys. That is still the case this year. Jameer Watkins is their best player, second team All-ACC. a 6'7", 210-pound forward guard option for them, guy that gets to the foul line a ton. And that was a big part of the story of the first meeting between these two teams. Florida State attempted 31 free throws compared to the Orange's 17. So as far as keys for tonight's game, FSU wants to get inside. They want to score inside, and they want to score at the foul line. They get a lot of their production at the free throw line. Not a very good shooting team. So Syracuse did play, I believe, if I remember correctly, a little bit of zone down in Tallahassee in the first meeting. Will they mess with that a little bit again? Could it be bringing Naheem McLeod off the bench like we've been seeing and maybe throw out that zone look a little bit at Florida State? As a team right now, FSU really has struggled to shoot the ball throughout the year. They are shooting 32% from three-point range, 275th in Division I. But in terms of where they get their points and their point distribution, two-pointers make up about 54% of their scoring. That's 69th most in the country. Pretty good mark of their scoring from two-point range. And then free throws, they get about 22% of their production from the free throw line, 55th highest mark in Division I. That's all according to Ken Pomeroy and his fancy stats. So basically what that means is Florida State's tall, they're long, they're a pretty good rebounding team. Syracuse really was beaten on the boards in the second half and the first time around. They lost the rebounding battle by 2 in that game. 36-34 was the final tally. We know the Orange have been much better rebounding-wise this year than previous years. A lot of that has been Eddie Lampkin. Lampkin was really neutralized in the first meeting because he was in foul trouble. This was really the only bad game Eddie Lampkin has had in ACC play from a point production standpoint. I know some people would say, well, and there probably has been a couple others. There's been a lot of ACC games. But for the most part, Eddie has been a walking double-double in ACC play. First game against Florida State, Lampkin went for 4 points, 4 rebounds, and played just 18 minutes. So he had 4 fouls in that game, was in foul trouble throughout much of it, and limited to 18 minutes, just 4 points, 4 rebounds in the first game. That was also the first game that Chris Bell moved from the starting lineup to the bench in his entire Syracuse career. He had started every game of his career as a junior this year until January 4th against Florida State. And, of course, that transition was a positive. Chris really broke out in this game. He had 18 points and was the Orange's leading scorer in the first meeting. Honestly, my memory of that game, Syracuse shot it well from three-point range, 10 for 25 from 3 against Florida State, and Bell was a big part of that. But my memory of that game is I almost felt like they should have gotten Chris Bell more looks in the second half. It was kind of frustrating. He was not missing shots, and it was frustrating that they couldn't get the ball to him once it got into the final 10, 12 minutes of the game. And really, over the final 10, 12 minutes of the game, Florida State stretched out their lead. It was a pretty close game, I think, throughout much of it. And then Florida State ended up winning that game by 16 points. And, of course, they got everything they wanted on offense because they did end up scoring 90 points, which Florida State has actually been more of a defensive-minded team this year than an offensive-minded team. But that day, it was a high-scoring game and a 90-74 win in Tallahassee. So that is kind of the things of note from the first meeting. We've got plenty more to discuss here in terms of what will be the matchups to watch, what will be some keys for this one here tonight as the Orange take on the Seminoles, coming up just past the top of the hour. And you can listen to the game, as always, on TK99 with Matt Park and the Syracuse Sports Network call. That is already gotten going, but we'll get going with the play-by-play action at 7 p.m. or just past the top of the hour here tonight, assuming that this game in front of us, the Virginia Tech and Cal game, does not go too deep or too overtime and go into overtime, maybe to extend the tip time of the Syracuse game. But we will be with you on the pregame show until 7 p.m., and then we'll be back with you on postgame tonight as soon as the final buzzer sounds. When we return here, we will get into a couple more things on this matchup, but I want to hear from the guy who's calling the game right now. That is the Hall of Famer, Jim Boeheim. He was on Orange Nation, impromptu call on Orange Nation yesterday sort of impromptu. Jordan, I think, was booking him, and then he was like, I'll just come on right now, is my understanding of what happened yesterday. So when Jim Boeheim wants to come on, he comes on, and he usually has a lot to say. So if you missed that conversation, we'll play back a little bit of that from yesterday. Jim Boeheim is on the call in the analyst chair right now on the TV side of things. So you can have Boeheim in one ear on the TV, have Boeheim in the other ear on the radio. And he had some interesting stuff to say about this year, NIL, and the state of Syracuse basketball right now with Paulie and Steve yesterday. So we'll play back some of that. And we'll continue to dissect this matchup. We welcome your phone calls as well. 315-437-7644. Again, that is 315-437-7644. Back after this on ESPN Radio, QSportsTalk.com.
The countdown to Yankees baseball.
Yankees baseball. Weather is good. We got Yankees on deck promos running. Well, I saw you guys saying it's going to be like 40 tomorrow. So hopefully everyone enjoyed the nice weather today while it lasts. I think it's going to warm up again this weekend, though. Eddie Lampkin masterclass tonight. That will be big. I could see him having a big game just knowing that he's probably going to be wanting the ball and giving it his all. Final college game if it's a loss for him. One last run. Hidden ball trick was awesome, Phil. Fooled me quite a bit. I was looking down. It was right after a face-off. I think I was looking down at the face-off stats or something. Then I popped my head up because the crowd was kind of cheering and English fooled me. And then, we kind of figured it out after that because the ball was flying in from the middle of the field. But they do that all the time, and it never really works anymore, honestly. I mean, I think it worked once a couple years ago because Alex Simmons, who was a grad transfer for Syracuse, was known for trying it a lot. I think he got maybe a lower level team. I'd have to go back and find the play, but it wasn't to the degree of that or that stage of the game. I mean, I think Joey said it afterwards. They try it 5 or 6 times a game. So that was awesome, though. That was probably the loudest I've heard the Dome for a lacrosse game when that went in. And then everyone looking up at the Jumbotron what just happened? Brian is on kid duty, I think, but he'll be back with postgame tomorrow if they win, and of course his show tomorrow. Is that true? Only won 2 games in a row once this year? Sounds right. I mean, they won their first 3 games of the year. That's the only time? Oh, and then Georgia Tech, BC, right after the Florida State game, they went back-to-back against 2 bad teams. Yeah, been an up and down year with a lot of downs, like I said. Yeah, 2 games in a row in conference. They did it once. That's it. I mean, what has it been? BC, I'm guessing they led at the half. I don't remember. That was the triple OT game. Miami, they led at the half, right? At Miami, I don't know. That was the really bad loss. They've led at the half so much in recent memory. Obviously, Virginia, SMU, Virginia Tech all had big leads the last 3 games. Yeah. It wasn't Akron State. It was, Youngstown State. Yep. And Youngstown State was double overtime. Yeah, Rick Beardsley's, that's one of the all-time lacrosse highlights, Phil. There was a good clip of Gary and his brother Paul doing the hidden ball trick, in a big game when they were players. I forget who they were playing, but not quite the same, but they fooled him, and then Paul just flings it in from around where Joey did. And someone clipped it, and then it went right into the one on Sunday. Yeah, that's right. Roy Simmons is an innovator. That's for sure. he's like Gary. They're similar in terms of how they want to spread the awareness of the sport and also how they think about the sport, that it should be played creatively. You should push the boundaries. I mean, that's why the hidden ball trick, like Joey said it after the game, he was like, they try that stuff because Gary is cool about it and he encourages it. I mean, like we just said, Gary did as a player. Yeah, I don't know if there's a football comparison.
This is the Burdick Ford and Burdick Toyota pregame show.
All right, back on the pregame show. Will this be the final game of the Orange men's basketball season? We have hit the ACC Tournament, Florida State, the Cuse tonight. Tip-off coming just past the top of the hour. Fingers crossed. If everything stays on track scheduling-wise, third game of 3 down in Charlotte for the 2025 ACC Tournament. 5 years to the day of when COVID and Rudy Gobert and all that news came out, and that was also I think that might have been second-round ACC Tournament, and the Orange had one bye. I don't know what it was, but they thumped UNC that night 5 years ago, and I was at the Greensboro Coliseum when everything went nuts, and we all knew that we're there calling the game, working the game. Everyone that was a fan there kind of just looked around and was like, yep, this is probably the last time that we are going to see a sporting event for quite a while. We're probably all going into lockdown for a while, and that was the case, as it was March 11th, 2020, when Syracuse thumped UNC in the ACC Tournament. We know their history in the ACC Tournament has been a little rocky, to say the least. There's been some crazy games between Syracuse and ACC Tournament competition. Of course, Jim Boeheim has been involved in a lot of those, including the final game of his coaching career. And speaking of the Hall of Fame coach, Jim Boeheim, he, as he is one to do, called into Orange Nation to sound off on all things Syracuse basketball and kind of go after the callers that call into this show sometimes and vent a little bit with Paulie and Steve. And Steve and Paulie, when Boeheim's on, they're going to let him vent. They're going to let the Hall of Famer talk. So let's play back a little bit of that conversation. This was Jim Boeheim on Orange Nation yesterday.
What's everybody complaining to Paulie about today?
Yeah, Paulie, what's the complaint du jour?
Second half adjustments, and J.J. Starling isn't as good as everybody thought he was. That seems to be the complaint du jour.
Well, let me go with J.J. first. J.J. is a really good player. His shooting has fallen off. I mean, he's getting to his shots. He just hasn't shot as well as he needs to. I think he's a first-team all-conference player when he shoots if he can improve his shooting. I think that's really the key. I think he was shooting the ball a little bit better early in the year, but he gets to the basket, he makes plays. I think his goal is let's get my shooting better. If I can get my shooting up to a reasonable level, I'm an all-conference player. That's what I think he is, without any question. And part of the late game situation is he hasn't been able to finish as he did early in the year. He finished some games. So I think that's been an issue. I just think generally overall, if you look at this team, they really could have or should have won their last 5 games. They've played well enough to win the last 5 games. Unfortunately, they didn't finish a couple that they could have won easily. But with everything that's happened this year, people discount that JJ missed a bunch of games and Donnie's been out really almost the whole conference season. They've come together now at the end and are playing good basketball. And it's unfortunate that they couldn't come together sooner. But their basketball right now, and particularly their offensive game, has been really good.
Yeah, and what does that tell you, Coach, about, and Paulie and I were talking about this at the beginning of the show, about the fact that there are plenty of examples out there of guys who quit on their coach or teams that wave the white flag. This team clearly has not. And I know they didn't win as many games as everybody wanted them to, but what does that tell you, the way that they've looked and played the last, 5 to 7 games?
Well, they finished better than any of those teams in the league, really. I mean, they finished extremely well, and it would have been easy to not do that. They fought hard. They played hard all year, I think, and they've had issues. Their defense hasn't been able to come together, which is one of the problems when you put a new team together with guys that have never seen each other before. Defense takes a long time. I think that's why Tony Bennett is out of coaching. He did not put his defense together the way he wanted to under today's conditions, and it takes longer. Unfortunately for this team, the key injury to Donnie and JJ hurt, but it's a group that when you're in the portal, you're really looking at what somebody has done at a different level. And the question is, can they do that at this level? And I think the answer is it's not that easy to do. I think Eddie's had a good year. He's had almost a little better year than he had at Colorado last year. That's a high level. The other guys are coming up to a higher level of basketball. And if you look around the league, you look around the country, there's a lot of guys, more than 50% of the portal guys that transferred, they're not playing at the level that you would have hoped to, because that jump is too big. And if you really look at the way they're playing now, especially, I think all these guys would be good players in another year. Unfortunately, they don't have another year. But I think it's taken a little too long to adjust to the level that they're asked to play at in the ACC or in high Division I basketball. But they've fought through it. They worked hard. I watch them practice. They work hard every day in practice. They're trying to do what they're told. There's been a lot of talk about, well, they don't listen. Well, I think they listen. I think they just haven't been able to execute. I think that's been the main thing, particularly on the defensive end. They just have not been able to execute. Part of that is not having a rim protector. Part of it is just the individual defensive play has not been good enough. Remember, these transfer guys were more known for their offense than their defense.
Good question in our chat section that we want to get your thoughts on. I'm sure you heard Rick Pitino's comments about high school players. He essentially said, "I'm not recruiting high school players right now. I'm making my living in the portal." What do you make of those comments?
First of all, you have to take everything that Rick says with a little bit of a grain of salt. He has 3 high school guys signed already. So is he not taking those guys now? Of course he is.
Right.
But he is looking to get 2 or 3 transfer portal guys. You don't replace the guys he has at the top level, the players he has, with freshmen. That's not going to happen. You can't do that anymore. You can still have freshmen, but he'll get at least 3 or 4 transfer portal guys. And I just think that's the way it is. I think every year, ideally, you return 3 or 4 guys. You might have a freshman or 2, and then you have 2 or 3 transfer portal guys. That's pretty much kind of blueprint that you see around the country from just about every team. I mean, Duke has outstanding freshmen, but they have 2 or 3 transfer portal guys that are really, really good players and are making a big difference with their team. And if you look at all the top teams, Auburn, Tennessee's leading scorer is a transfer portal guy. I mean, you go right down the list. every team in the country, their top guys. If you look at the top 20 players, some of their top guys are transfer portal guys. So you have to have a combination of transfer portal, maybe a couple freshmen, and then 2 or 3 returners to be a good team.
Coach, how important is retention on a team? And like Syracuse going into next year, if they can retain people, they'll have a senior at the 2, a senior at the 3, and maybe a sophomore at the 4. How important is it to retain players?
That's important, very important. I mean, in a perfect world, you're going to retain J.J. Starling and Donnie. You're going to retain those 2 guys for sure. I like Peter. I think Peter can be a really good player at this level. I think those guys need to be retained. I think you have to work really hard to make sure those guys are there. And Elijah Moore or whoever else falls into that category. Chris Bell is one of the better shooters in the country. I mean, you keep 3 or 4 of those guys, and you have an outstanding group of freshmen that I think can contribute. They're probably not ready to be stars, but that's okay if they can contribute. And I think they could. I think Carmelo's son, I think Sadiq White, I think there's 2 or 3 of the freshmen that can contribute. I hear good things about the kid from Australia. So I think that those guys can contribute, but you obviously have to get a center in the portal and other guard, another good player in the backcourt, I think would be helpful. If you can retain those guys with those freshmen, I think the team would be in a really, really good position next year. You never know when you don't know. When Carmelo came in as a freshman and Jerry came in as a freshman, we were not picked in the top 25 preseason. So you didn't know until you get guys there and see how they fit together.
One quick question on the ACC tournament itself. If I'm giving you Duke or the field, is it a no-brainer that you're taking Duke, or do you think that either Clemson or Louisville or maybe somebody else like Carolina can knock them off?
Well, Carolina couldn't beat them at home, so I don't think they're going to beat them. I like Louisville. I think that the coach there, I voted for him for Coach of the Year, even though really John Schreier should probably get it. He went 19-1. I mean, they really both should be Coach of the Year. And Brad, it's unusual, but I would say we almost have 3 guys that qualify for Coach of the Year. It's hard to pick one of them. But it's pretty easy to pick Player of the Year. We know that. But I just think that it would be hard to beat Duke in this tournament. I would be surprised unless somebody got hurt. I just don't see it. I just think they hung in there against North Carolina in the first half when Cooper Flagg was out. Had foul trouble. He's a difference maker like we haven't seen, I don't think, in a long, long time. It's kind of like Grant Hill was at Duke. A guy that does everything: offense, defense, rebound, block shots. But no, I don't see Duke losing it.
All right, there is Coach Boeheim, the Heimer, who joined us yesterday on Orange Nation, called in to chat a little bit with Stephen Fonte and Paulie Sibilia. So that was from yesterday. Couldn't have him on today because Jim Boeheim is on the TV call right now after a wild conclusion to the first round, or the first game of the first round, between Notre Dame and Pittsburgh, where probably one of the worst foul calls I've seen in a really long time was assessed to Pittsburgh that allowed Notre Dame to hit some free throws and win the game by 1. Jeff Capel and his team are going home packing after just a terrible way to end the game and end their season. Terrible call. Jim Boeheim was on the call for that, and he bluntly said what we all were thinking, which was that was not a foul. As soon as he saw it, I think he said it in the most Jim Boeheim way possible. So fun to see Coach now doing some games on the TV side of things. He will not be doing the Syracuse game, for anyone that's driving home and wondering that. It'll be Kevin Brown, John Crispin on the TV call tonight, which is on the ACC network. So get settled in for that. 7 p.m. is the scheduled tip time right now, just past the top of the hour. We're here on our pregame show brought to you by Burdick. We'll keep things rolling by previewing this matchup a little bit more, the Orange and Florida State. Of course, you can also listen to the game tonight on our partner station, TK99. Matt Park, Coach Jim Saddleman will have the radio call if you're driving around tonight. That will get going full play-by-play action just past the top of the hour as well. We'll hit a timeout here on QSportsTalk.com and ESPN Radio.
The 315 with Brian Higgins.
Jim is fairly handsome for an old timer. You thought that was the right call at the end of the Pittsburgh game? I don't know how. I mean, he barely grazed him. Yeah, Govendo. I was starting to think today when our course is going to start opening up. I was getting the itch. Yeah, you can't make that call at the end of the game, Brett. I'm actually dumbfounded that someone thought that was the right call. Drumlins was open. They're always open, I feel like. Maybe this weekend, Govendo, because there's no lacrosse this weekend, so I'll be looking to play if there is a course open. I don't know. Sometimes I go for that little 9-holer at Tecumseh because that's usually open too, even when it's bad conditions or snow still out there. Golf is overrated. Not walking. Drumlins is a tough course to walk. I will say that. All right, we got a 1-point game. 8 seconds left. On the odd number, that's good for avoiding overtime. Virginia Tech up 1. Am I going to do a legal live play-by-play of this when we get back? It just wasn't a foul period, though, Brad. Even if it was, I think it would have been, the crowd would have booed that call if it was 5 seconds into the second half, 10 seconds into the game, didn't matter. And I also do think you got to also keep in mind that it gets more physical towards the end of a game, and you don't want to be deciding the game if you're a ref. Pat refs. He's not just like making that up. You know what? I bet Pat will call postgame, and I'm sure we can ask him about that. Although something tells me Pat and I will be talking about the game and be yelling at each other about other things. But maybe Pat will call right now. Who knows? You never know when Pat's going to call. Yeah, Brett, I don't know what to tell you. If you thought that was a foul, I'm sorry. I mean, I've seen photos of Pat reffing the pit. Maybe you're in a different section than him. I don't know how it works, but maybe this is Pat right now. He heard us.
It's the Burdick Ford and Burdick Toyota pregame show.
Rolling along with the pregame show. We'll see if it is the final pregame show of the year. The Orange in the ACC Tournament first round tonight, taking on the Seminoles, second meeting this year. Florida State got them at the Tucker Center in early January. Ended up being a rout in a way, but was really a pretty close game throughout much of it. Florida State pulled away in the second half, back when you didn't really know what to expect from Syracuse or Florida State this year. The Orange did have J.J. Starling back in that game. It was the final game Donnie Freeman played all year, and they lost 90-74. When Syracuse gives up 75 or more points in ACC play, they are 0 for 11 when they give up 75 or more points in ACC play. And they gave up 90 that day to a Florida State team that grades out better as a defensive team than an offensive team. The Seminoles are 87 on KenPom, 89 in the net rankings. So they have been not so good this year. They're 17-13 overall, 8-12 in ACC play, but one of those 8 wins was over the Orange down in the Tucker Center in early January. Been a while since these two teams have played. Florida State coming off a win over SMU, and the Orange are coming off a win over Virginia. Tip time just past the top of the hour. I say that, though, and it looks like we're going to overtime in the Cal-Virginia Tech game in front of us, 60-all. So it has been 2 tight games so far to kick off the ACC tournament in Charlotte. But we will be with you until 7 p.m., and the tip time might get pushed back a little bit for those that want to watch tonight. It is on ACC Network. Let's go to the phone lines here, and let's bring on Govendo. Govendo, what's happening?
I heard you wanted someone to argue with.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not looking for arguing, but you know,
you're not going to get it from me, Pat.
Yeah, a little different than when Pat calls in. Not that sometimes I welcome it from Pat, but yeah, what's on your mind?
I think, I guess I hope they do great, as good as they can in this tournament. But at the end of the day, I'm already focused in on 2025, 2026. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Bringing in the new guys and really seeing what we can pull in the transfer portal at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Because we already know where we sit for last year's team, and we know that we have to do a lot better.
Yeah.
To make it to be competitive. So now is Jim Boeheim doing our game as well?
No, he's not. He's going to be done after this game, I think. So it'll be Kevin Brown, who's a Syracuse grad, and then John Crispin on
Kevin
the call.
Brown,
yeah.
Syracuse
He's good.
Chiefs guy.
Right.
How about you remember when the Big East used to do the 12 and the 2 and the 7 and the 9? I mean, I think the ACC did that too. Obviously, are we just playing games from 12 to 10 o'clock at night now?
Well, because there's 4 games, there is like a afternoon and night session starting tomorrow. Today is just the 3 games. Yeah. So I'd have to look, but if Syracuse wins, they're playing I think a 9:30 tip tomorrow. So it must be 7, 9:30, and then I could pull it up, but it's probably like 1 and 3:30 or something for the afternoon games tomorrow.
Are we going to get the NIL money that we need to put together a competitive team?
I think things are trending much better. I think they are, you can make a case that they were too late to the game in that regard, and I think that's a very valid, critique of the situation. But I do think, based on what the coaches are saying, based on what I'm hearing, I feel like they're going to be in a much better spot next year. And, of course, they've already announced, revenue sharing. They're going to max that out, which should, if anything, help a little bit. I don't think that's going to totally change the landscape or, be something that really neutralizes the teams that are struggling. or really helps out the teams that are struggling in NIL money. But I do think they're in a better spot NIL-wise. I think what happened with a lot of the ACC teams, honestly, is they focus so much attention on football money because conference realignment and everything. And now I feel like some of these ACC teams that have proud basketball programs are going to, come back around and say, we got to
get better again. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, this is just unacceptable, honestly, to have 3 teams out of 18 in the NCAA tournament is what it's looking like. I mean, it's sad to think how much the ACC has fallen off on the men's basketball side of things.
I'm gonna say the player. You're gonna say yay or nay. Do you want this guy back?
Okay,
next year?
This will be fun.
Chris Bell.
Yeah, I would say yay. I mean, just because he is one of the best shooters in the country, and
100%. And he's been here 3 years, and he hasn't transferred yet.
Yeah, and
do you give him another year? You know what I mean?
I think you definitely want him back. Yes. Now you don't want him to be the second best guy or second best scoring option. And that's what we thought he was going to be going into the season. And we realized that he just hasn't developed the other parts of his game. And that's not going to happen. You can't count on that. So you hope that you can have a season like he did in his sophomore year last year where he was the third guy and he got a lot of good looks. So, I would want him back because you can never have too much shooting.
Kyle Cuff?
Yeah, I don't really know if I'm going to say no to any of these guys. I don't think Kyle Cuff.
But are you upset if they leave? Like, you know what I mean? Like we're going to be okay without certain guys. And what I'm getting at is yes, you want Donnie back. You probably want JJ back.
I'm not upset if Kyle Cuff leaves. I don't think just because. Right. In a perfect world, honestly, and I like Kyle Cuff a lot. I think he plays really hard. In a perfect world,
very much so. He's the energizer bunny.
Yeah, he's really. I wish more guys played like him on the team, but at the same time, I don't think he would be in the rotation of any of the top 25 teams in the country. So, in a perfect world, he's probably not playing as many minutes as he did this year, and he's probably not that big of a loss if he does move on. But he'll probably be back, I would think.
Now, you would think you want to try to hang on to Patar and develop him.
Yeah, because he's a guy that probably is comfortable in the role he had this year, and he does. Obviously, he's understanding that he's not going to be like a starter next year or something. But you want him to develop, and he gets compared to Dolezaj probably too much, but he could be a 3-4 year guy.
Being the white guy from overseas is going to.
Yeah, right. That's an easy, lazy comparison.
And who else are we missing? I mean, obviously you want Donnie, you want JJ, but the rest of the team, no offense to them, I mean, we're not going to be hurt if they don't come back. You know what I mean? I'd like to see Chris Bell really make the progress next year that he should have made this year.
Yeah, but I do think you want all those guys. Like, if Kyle Cuff is back, that's fine. You just don't want to count on him as much as you did this year. You want to, get better guys in the transfer portal so that he's maybe playing 5 minutes here or there instead of, remember, what was it, Wake Forest? He was the most field goal attempts of anyone on the Syracuse roster in the game. And that was when they didn't have JJ, but still, you don't want Kyle Cuff being a 10, 12 shot attempts a night type of guy, obviously.
Are we done with the West, or not the West? I want to call him West Johnson, but he's not Wes Johnson. Chance Westry, are we done with that experiment?
Yeah, I think he'll probably move on. I don't know that for sure, but, I don't see why they would bring him back because it just feels like he's not any closer to playing. And, yeah, unfortunately, I just don't think that worked out, and he's just had injury issues, and who knows? I mean, I could see him transferring somewhere else and just hoping to kind of build back up and get back on the court, but I don't think you can count on him as being a role player next year.
Last question for you, and I'll let you go.
Yeah, this is fun.
I know you only got an hour or whatever, but also the game's delayed. But where was I going?
Are you done?
I forgot what I was going to ask you.
That's all right. That was plenty of questions. You filled a segment very nicely there.
That was my goal, so we didn't have to listen to an interview we already heard. So
yeah,
I wanted to get you talking off the cuff.
I like it.
But anyways, hey, I hope we end Lenny Hamilton's career tonight. One more day. Let's play one more day.
Yeah,
and see where we fall.
Survive in advance.
We did forget about Chapa, so.
You want him back? Yeah. right? I mean, you agree with that?
The whole team, right? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I don't think Chapa is. I don't want him definitely in the starting lineup next year because he's kind of like Chris Bell when he was young. He's got a lot of things to work on: rebounding, defense. I'm not expecting him to take some huge leap next year, but he still is a guy that can shoot the lights out when he's hot. And, he was a top 100 recruit. You want him back for sure.
Tim, I hope to golf with you soon.
Okay. Sounds good. That's Matt Gavendo in Syracuse. We appreciate him filling a segment for us there and putting me on the spot with some 20 questions or whatever we want to call that. We'll take a break. We have one more segment to get to on the other side, and we'll do that after this, as Syracuse gets ready to take on Florida State in the ACC Tournament. First round game tonight. You're listening to Orange Pregame on ESPN Radio Syracuse, CuseSportsTalk.com. Oh, no, now we're overdue. Went too long. Should have cut the promo. Yep, Donnie's a given. Have they even said, Elijah Moore, has there been any recent news on him? Because I think it's just understood at this point he's out for the year, right? They probably won't announce the time of the game until this is over, but I would guess you're looking at a 7:30-ish tip at this point. Because we got, it's going to be probably 18, 20 minutes from when this game ends at the minimum, because teams have to warm up. What's up?
He just said shit, didn't he?
I mean, I couldn't tell. Yeah.
I also wonder if the way he used the word shit wouldn't even be like FCC.
Yeah.
Also, this is going to go to double
did you say
overtime.
shit? It seemed like you did, but it also seemed like it was like
This is about to go to double overtime, and I'm so pissed.
Yeah, we're going to wrap it at this segment, but it's a bummer that it's going to be a later.
I don't know. I think you're supposed to lead everybody right up to tip, Tim Leonard. I think you should just keep talking.
I could if you want. People want me to keep talking?
I think you should just talk through the game, talk after the game.
I'll do a little, I'll go a little longer than normal because that's just natural based on now we're...
Oh, the walking bets are out. Huge. We taking Donovan Mitchell.
Walking bets?
4.5 assists.
What's that? Like?
You don't know Taylor Mathis's walking bets?
Oh, that chick. Now I know you're talking about.
I can't believe you know her by name, but not by the walking bets.
Well, I thought this was like some app or something because you were like, they're out. Like, I thought you were serious. It was actually.
No, they're out. The walking, they're out.
But they don't pertain to Syracuse, right?
No, I've never taken one of her bets, dude. Are you kidding me? She could be like.
Did she even post what her record is?
I don't care.
I'm sure it's terrible.
I don't know, dude. I'm not even. I couldn't promise you there are actually picks under every post.
Right.
Like, I don't know what's going on. I'm taking my own locks, baby. Taking my own locks.
I tell you what, guys, we have one more segment and then break. So I'll go for like 10 minutes and then we'll go over the hour, but we're out of break. So I thought there was no chips in there. I don't think there's chips in there.
What do you think I did? Balled up a bunch of papers that were used for the match game and then put them in a chip bag and put a clip on it? That's
Maybe.
Stupid. That's a stupid theory.
0.7 and 100.1.
This is the Burdick Ford and Burdick Toyota pregame show.
All right, it has become an extra long pregame show here because tip time is getting moved back a little bit. So if you're driving home and you're thinking, I'm going to miss the start of the game, well, you're probably not, because this could even be double overtime. We could be looking at quite the late start here tonight. We welcome you back on the Burdick pregame show. We'll be back postgame whenever the game ends tonight, but we're looking at, on our TV screen in front of us, a tie game with 48 seconds left in overtime between 15 seed Cal and 10 seed Virginia Tech. So after the first game was a wildly close, very low-scoring 55-54 win for Notre Dame over Pittsburgh, extremely controversial ending to that game, which was a clear non-foul that was called a foul that allowed Notre Dame to get free throws to win the game. Offensive rebound foul, which was probably one of the worst foul calls I've seen in a while. So a hot start in terms of the refereeing in the ACC tournament. And now we're looking at a very close one, another kind of low-scoring game. Cal and Virginia Tech, two teams that are pretty good offenses, two teams that are 13 and 18 on the year. Same record as Syracuse, the Orange, the 14 seed in this tournament. And they will play the 11 seed Florida State coming up. Maybe we're hoping at this point 7:30-ish, I would say, because whenever this game ends, it'll be 20 minutes about until tip time in Charlotte. And Virginia Tech has just gone up by 2 with 48 seconds left. So we'll hang on a little bit overtime here with you guys and try to get you closer to tip time, which could be more in the 7:30 neighborhood. And if it goes to double overtime, we could be looking at a 7:45, 7:50 type of situation. But we will just hang on and see how this game ends in front of us and what that means for the tip time. Again, we'll be back with you for the post-game show as soon as this game wraps up tonight, and might be the last post-game show of the Orange basketball season. They are slight underdogs to Florida State after losing to Florida State by 16 in the first meeting this year. Let's hit a little This Day in SU basketball history, brought to you by the Shep Family Funeral Home. Celebrate your loved one with help from Shep Family Funeral Home. Visit shepfamily.com, SCHEPP family.com. 5 years to the day in terms of history in the ACC tournament. 5 years to the day from when COVID really became a thing in all our minds to the extent that it was on March 11, 2020, when the Orange whooped UNC. A kind of shocking result to that game, and what was the final game with fans for quite a long time, and was right before the ACC tournament, and everything went on lockdown. I remember being at that game, calling the game for student radio at the time, and Rudy Gobert, the press conference with him came out. He was touching all the microphones and stuff. I think Tom Hanks had COVID that night, and it was just a wild feeling to be at that game, knowing that you're courtside at a game that is fans everywhere, good crowd, a lot of UNC fans, of course. And that would be the last game we would all see for a while. The next morning, I woke up. Syracuse is supposed to play Louisville late that night in their next ACC tournament game. Similar type of situation where they were better that year than this year, but they needed to win the ACC tournament to play more basketball. And it did feel like they put together quite the game and maybe would have gone on a run that year. I saw Joe Girard, Elijah Hughes were tweeting about that today. The final score was 81-53 that day. And keep in mind, that was a year that UNC was terrible. They did not make the tournament. But also, Syracuse going into that game had lost to UNC, I think, like 6 straight times, because no matter who UNC had under Roy Williams, they always had a guy in that high post area against the zone that was a good passer, whether it was Theo Pinson. It didn't matter. They really had Syracuse's number. Of course, the 2016 Final Four game was a notable one in the Syracuse-UNC series as well. So that is our This Day in SU basketball history. Recent ACC tournaments for the Orange. Since that game in what was 2020 when they lost to, or beat UNC, I should say, in the game before COVID and the season was canceled. 2021, they beat NC State in the first round pretty handedly, lost to Virginia on a buzzer beater from Reese Beekman. That was the 1 seed Virginia. I believe the Orange were the 8 or the 9 seed that year, had to have been. And they did go to the NCAA tournament and went on a little bit of a run that year. That was the Buddy Boeheim year where they took down San Diego State. West Virginia went to the Sweet 16 that year with Buddy going off. And he sort of started that in the ACC tournament, had some great games in the ACC tournament, and they lost to Virginia on a wild buzzer beater. Next year is when the struggle sort of started for Syracuse in a way in the ACC tournament. They actually did win the first round game over Florida State last time these two teams met in the ACC tournament the next year in Buddy's final year, and that was the game where Buddy was suspended for doing that little punch to the gut that he had to the Florida State player, and then he did not play the next day against Duke. Syracuse actually really hung tough without Buddy Boeheim against a very good Duke team in that game after Duke came in and crushed them in the Dome a couple weeks before that. Jimmy Boeheim had a really good game, and they tried to extend their season but could not in an 88-79 loss to Duke. Last 2 years, the Orange have not won an ACC tournament game. Last year, the Jim Boeheim era was the buzzer beater from Wake Forest, 77-74. Last year was the start of NC State's run, which Syracuse is going to try and copy that. NC State had won the night before on a wild sequence to end the first-round game. The Orange were the 7 seed last year. They finished tied for 5th in the conference last season, and they fell 83-65. Got kind of thumped by NC State after beating NC State twice in the regular season. The conversation of can you beat a team 3 times and how tough that was played a factor, and they lost as NC State went on their long run, and now Kevin Keats is no longer the head coach of NC State, and it looks like maybe they're zeroing in on Will Wade, or we'll see who they hire to fill that slot. But that is a little bit of ACC tournament history. Harding and Mazzotti injury report. Not much to report, really, on that front. I know Elijah Moore, I think, is still out at this point. It seems like there hasn't been a ton of chatter about him recently, but I think we're all under the assumption that he is out for the season and wasn't playing a ton when he was out there. So Syracuse, of course, still without Donnie Freeman, Chance Westry, all the typical names. But we'll see how J.J. Starling plays tonight, if he can bounce back. The matchup inside will be very intriguing. Eddie Lampkin was a non-factor in the first meeting. And probably the biggest key to the game for me tonight is to avoid turnovers. If you're Syracuse, they had 15 turnovers in the first matchup. Florida State likes to get out and run in transition. That's how they score a lot of their points. They got a lot of fast break points in the first meeting in early January when the Seminoles won 90-74. FSU had 9 turnovers in that game compared to 15 from Syracuse. So if they could get the turnover margin in a better spot and then hang with them on the boards and maybe even win the rebounding battle after losing by 2 down in Tallahassee, you'd feel better about Syracuse's chances. We'll see how the Orange play tonight, though. Couple interesting things just as we sort of pass the time here leading into this pushback tip time. It's still overtime action on the TV in front of us between Cal and Virginia Tech. So we're looking at quite the late start compared to the 7 p.m. intended start for the nightcap game tonight. Third game of 3 in the ACC tournament first round. I was looking up what were the Orange's preseason projections in the first 2 years of the Red Autry era compared to how they finished. And it's kind of fascinating because year 1 was basically the inverse of what happened in year 2. So first year of the Red Autry era, last year, of course, ACC preseason poll, the Orange were picked 10th. We're actually going to double overtime in this game. So we'll hang here for a little bit because what else are we going to do? We're just going to pass the time, hop in the chat, and we can even take some questions in the chat as well on QSportsTalk.com. So double OT, of course, that's what we get. It's been that type of year for Syracuse basketball. We got to wait and wait for what maybe could be the final game of the year. The Orange need a win tonight, of course, to extend their season in this first-round game against Florida State. So first year of the Coach Autry era, last year, ACC preseason poll had Syracuse 10th. They finished tied for 5th. They were the 7th seed in the ACC tournament. So they exceeded expectations. KenPom had them in the preseason last year, 105. They finished 80th in the KenPom final rankings. So up 25 spots from their preseason projection. Bart Torvik had them even worse, 117 in the preseason going into last year. The Orange finished 71st on the Bart Torvik rankings. So they exceeded the Bart Torvik computer metrics by 46 spots last year. And I say it's the inverse because this year, Bart Torvik had them 72nd in the preseason rankings after finishing 71st last year. And currently, the Orange are 112 in KenPom, 112 in the Bart Torvik rankings. So after exceeding their Bart Torvik preseason projection, and for those that don't know, that's a site that ranks every single team in college basketball in Division I. So they were projected to finish 117 last year. They finished 71st. This year, projected 72nd, and currently are 112. So a minus 40 underachieving sort of metric this year compared to a plus 46 last year. Bart Torvik's projected record last year for Syracuse was 13-16. 7-13 in ACC play. Does that sound familiar? Because that's what Syracuse is this year. Of course, they won 20 games last year, 20-12, 11-9 in conference. They were actually tied for 5th in the ACC last year. It feels like that's wrong, but they were. And the ACC, of course, wasn't very good last year. It is really not good this year as well. This year, Bart Torvik projected Syracuse to win 17 games. I heard Stephen Pauly talking about this the other day. I think KenPom, there's no way to find it. It's all just what I'm trying to remember. I think, and this is just me thinking and trying to go back in my memory bank, and if someone finds this, maybe tweet at me or something, but I think they projected the Orange for 12 wins, which is kind of confusing because KenPom actually had them projected to finish, or preseason polls, they were 68th in the country. Right now, they are 112. So red was 40, the projection 44 spots off of what they are right now, which doesn't really make sense to me because if they were projected 12 wins, they won more games than that. I guess the ACC has been bad and all that. I don't know. I wish I could go back in KenPom like you can in Bart Torvik and find the preseason record, but I do remember looking at it and even looking at it throughout the year and being like, wow, KenPom is not having Syracuse win any of these games. Cal has really pulled away in the start of this second overtime. We're under 2 minutes in double OT between Cal and Virginia Tech. They're on an 8-0 run to lead at 75-67. So if this game ends in the next, 10 minutes, then you're probably looking at like a 7:45 tip tonight between the Orange and the Seminoles. Anyway, it's just sort of fascinating how basically year one, Syracuse was projected to finish with a record like they have in year two, and year two, they were projected to finish with a record like they had in year one of the Coach Autry tenure so far. So that just goes to, show everyone, I think, around here had better expectations. Like, I'm sure if you pulled the actual Syracuse fan base, what would the projected record be? What would their expectations be? I think people around here were calling for the team to make the tournament. Bart Torvik had Syracuse at a 12% chance to make the NCAA tournament going into this year. They projected them at 17-13. They are currently 13-18. They projected them to win 10 ACC games, go 10-10. They're 7-13 in ACC play. So Red overachieved in year one, underachieved in year two to basically the same degree. And, of course, we know he's getting to year three, and they have a lot of things to correct and a lot of things to do better on in terms of the transfer portal, and the hope is with the general manager they will do that. But that kind of puts into perspective that maybe it didn't really, in my head, add up that they overachieved that much in year one. And I also just think because I'm talking to Syracuse fans, I'm here in Syracuse, our projection, if you're a Syracuse listener, follower of the program, fan, I'm sure you didn't have them winning 17 games this year. I'm sure you thought that based on how Red overachieved in year one and they won 20 games, they would build off of that. They did not, for obvious reasons, and injuries certainly played a factor in that. So we'll leave you with that on the pregame show. Looks like this game's going to wrap up, fingers crossed, in a little bit. I guess just root for Cal at this point, and hopefully the game will get over sooner rather than later, and then we will have basketball on our airwaves on TK99, play-by-play call with Matt Park, Coach Saddlin on the TK99 side of things, Syracuse Sports Network call that is ongoing, and I'm sure they're kind of doing what I'm doing right now, treading water until the opening tip. But thanks to everyone in the chat on CuseSportsTalk.com. We hope you will stick around and join us later on tonight for the postgame show. We'll be back with you as soon as the final buzzer sounds for that one. And we will be taking your phone calls at 315-437-7644 for the postgame show. You can always chat away on CuseSportsTalk.com as well, and we'll follow along for the postgame show that way as well. But probably about a 7:45 tip here tonight for Syracuse and Florida State, first round of the ACC Tournament. So that'll be that for our Burdick pregame show. We'll be back postgame with you. Get on over to TK99 if you want to hear a little bit more pregame coverage leading into this one. And again, Cal and Virginia Tech in double overtime is the reason that this has been delayed. Scheduled to be a 7 p.m. tip, but we can't have nice things. We're getting pushed back, and that's kind of how the season has gone. We'll see how the Orange play, coming off really a strong game against Virginia at home, have been playing some of their better basketball of the season, just need to put together 40 minutes, and they are slight underdogs tonight against Florida State. So we will talk to you post-game after the final buzzer of this first-round matchup tonight between the Orange and the Noles. Thanks so much for listening on our pregame show on ESPN Radio and CuseSportsTalk.com.
This is Orange Nation.